to make the next step and certainly to be successful, you have to do that.
All righty. Well, I just hit the go live trigger.
I see
Um,
it.
so we can actually start with that conversation. We might as well.
Well, that
All
sounds
right.
great.
Yeah. Well, Peter, thanks for joining me. This is awesome. We've gotten to know each other a little bit over the past couple of years, and I'm thrilled to have you. So this is going to be a lot of fun.
Well, Andrew, thank you so much for inviting me on because I really believe in what you're doing. I really like your technology, your team's technology, and being one of the first dealers. I remember I called you up right after PRI when I heard about it, and I said, "Man, this is sounds like a little box that is an encapsulation of my entire coaching approach." It was great.
Yeah, I remember that conversation. That was awesome. And then we met in person at VIR at the World Challenge race,
That's right.
and brought the units with us, and that kind of started everything off. And I remember sitting in the trailer with you for a few minutes and going over some in-car video at VIR and realizing you've been doing this for a while. That was really cool. I certainly learned a lot. Unfortunately, my car had all sorts of just copious amounts of mechanical issues that weekend. I wasn't
I
able
remember.
to put them to practice, but I've since been back to VIR a couple of times, so I've been able to jog my memory with that brief coaching session. So
Well, that's great. That
that's really
really is.
cool. Well, folks who are joining us, for those of you who don't know Peter Krause, you're obviously not on Facebook or Enlist, but Peter has been in the motorsports data acquisition game for quite a while, and has really done some really significant things for this industry, and obviously coaching as well for a long time, and really paved the way for kind of the modern approach to what we do at the racetrack. So, Peter, you want to tell us a little bit about your background? And I know prior to coaching, you might have done something with what's on my shirt right here.
Well, you're very kind, Andrew. I appreciate that lead in. That's wonderful. And I love your t-shirt because first and foremost, I was a professional mechanic for 25 years. I prepared a variety of mostly Italian cars, Fiat, Fiat Abarths, Alfa Romeos, Ferraris, Maseratis, in a shop first in Durham, North Carolina, the old Fiat dealership, and then my own shop out near Raleigh Durham Airport. And we grew it to 4 or 5 employees, 2 tractors and trailers running all over the place. It was really a fun thing, but it was hard work. And as the cars got newer, I said, this is not as much fun as it used to be. Let's see what we can do that's really fun. My business partner bought me out, was really nice about it. And I went from being a mechanic to uh, being a professional driving analysis coach. I'm not really, it's funny. When I started doing this, my best friend said, "How are you going to offer professional coaching for club level and amateur drivers in HPDEs, track days, club level racing? How are you going to charge for that when there's so many other people that'll offer it for free?" And I thought about that for a little bit, and I'm a geek for sure. I built gaming computers way back when in the late '90s when the Voodoo 3DFX graphic cards were out, and the Pentium Intel processor was a new thing. Windows 95 had been out only for a short period of time. And so I've always been into that idea of how do you leverage technology to help you shorten the learning curve on things. And I told him, I turned to him and I said, "Look, I am going to hang my hat on data." And he said, "Well, how the heck are you going to do that?" And I said, every right seat instructor has their own experience base and their own frame of reference. I would like to offer these people an objective review and review of what they did in the car, and we can make better, more objective decisions on what to do next. And my whole goal is the reason why I focus on amateur level HPDE track day drivers is because they have more fun. They're doing it as an avocation. Sometimes it's hard and the lines get blurred because it is my vocation. And when I started doing this, nobody was doing it. and very few people. I mean, I can count on two hands how many people were making a living in this country doing
Mm.
what I was doing when I started doing it. And most of the more senior level professional school chief instructors, folks like Jim Pace, Mike Zemicki, guys that were working with IndyCar drivers, and of course Ross, Ross Bentley, who I've been fortunate enough to do a lot of collaborative work with, and we always enjoy doing that because we get along well and we complement each other's approach.
Mm.
But I come from a great background in terms of being able not only to wrench on the cars, I understand the dynamics of what the car is doing on the track, but also a study of tires, a study of driving the car itself. I've raced I've raced for 35 years, and I've raced everything from a 69 horsepower Fiat 850 Spider.
69 horse.
I mean, you might as well just laugh.
Yeah.
That's all you can do is you're going down the front straight at Roebling Road, reading the sports pages because you got that much time before turn one, all the way to 2-liter Le Mans prototype purpose-built sports racing cars. So, which I still race, and I've really enjoyed that. And so I have a office facility that I purchased, a commercial facility up at Virginia International Raceway. I hold a whole bunch of training seminars there. I'm a member number 05 of the driving club at VIR, which is a wonderful place for people to go. I had a great time at the driving club at Road Atlanta, seeing you a couple weeks ago. And, but I'm never going to do anything I don't like. I am very passionate about driver optimization is really what I am. Where is my card? Let me see. It doesn't say coach. It says driver performance analyst. So what I am is I send people out with a mission and I say, be accurate, hit your marks, and we'll go from there. Come back in so that we can both sit down and look at a video and you can be happy with what you did and I can get a reasonable idea of your vision of where you should put the car. Then we look at the data and we pick no more than one or two things for the very next session and say, look, I don't think your transitions between wide open throttle and braking are quick enough. I think you're trying to be too smooth. Does the car ever get unstable under braking? Well, no. Okay, well, let's engage the car. Let's get into a conversation with the car until it pushes back. And obviously you don't want to do it in such a way that people get hurt or you run the risk of damaging the car. But you want to do it methodically, incrementally. But my job is great. I sell, I don't know, 6 or 7 of the best technology tools in the world for drivers to not only get better, but to coach themselves. And Apex Pro is certainly one of them. I mean, that's the best part about it is the encapsulation of what I think is most important as a professional coach, as somebody who does this for a living, who's made, quite frankly, a very, very, very good living doing this in the last dozen years or so. And it's great.
Well, we first of all appreciate you being here, but learning about the history of any industry, market, sport, what have you, I think is a critical part of understanding where it goes in the future, which I think is what I've appreciated so much about getting to spend, frankly, not enough time with you, but at least a little bit over the past couple of years to understand what the industry looked like 20 years ago, because I've been doing this for 10 years now, which is crazy for me to think about, but really to be able to lean on experience and stuff that I've learned from you and Ross and and others talk about, this is where the industry was 20 and 30 years ago. It's just it's different right now. The not only has the technology gotten simpler and easier to use, but the approach, the availability of racetracks, the number of racetracks, I mean, all these things have just changed.
It has. And it's all been for the good, I think. It really has. I mean,
Awesome.
you look at the performance of the cars today, and the thing is that as someone who spent their entire lives working on historic racing cars, I look at some of the current cars out right now, like a 2019 GT3 RS Porsche, or the the BMW M4 GTS, or the new Corvette. My goodness, I mean the new Corvette, the new Mustang. Goodness, the GT500.
Yeah.
You look at these cars and they are outperforming cars that won Daytona not that many decades ago.
They really are. Yeah.
You know, so that's that sort of sea change. And
Yeah.
and I appreciate you talking about the history of it, because I mean GPS data acquisition technology didn't start until 2001. And integrated video and information rendering onto video didn't start until 2009.
Yeah.
So this technology is relatively new, but
Absolutely.
where you and your team have done such a great job, and where a lot of people are sort of moving, and I think you guys saw this early, is it's got to be easy to use or people won't use it.
Hmm.
And I work with so many people who say, I don't want to learn how to do this. I want you to tell me what to do. And honestly, that's my client base, is people who can afford to do that, and people who will pay to do that. And I do it, by God. I spend a lot of time looking at not only drivers trying to improve, but also I have a tremendous repository, 11 terabytes of video and data from some of the best drivers in the world, including a world driving champion, including Le Mans winners, including Sebring, multi-time Sebring winners,
Oh, that's cool.
multi-time Daytona 24 winners. And I can tell you right now, yes, there are differences at the very highest level, but those differences are so thin you could cut them. You could hardly cut them with a razor blade.
Yeah. Well, that's excellent. I'm very excited to get into this conversation, and especially looking at some data, because we can kind of relate and maybe use your experience to say, we're going to look at some of my data from Sebring here, and we're going to kind of critique what I was doing, and we can maybe say, if this was Fernando Alonso, what might be different about it, or how small these actual differences are, because something that we find in data all the time, is that a lot of times these issues that drivers have are kind of global issues. They kind of tend to have the same things that they do consistently.
Absolutely.
And it's not about making those issues a lot better, a big chunk better in every corner. It's about shaving a little, thinly sliced piece of Parmesan amount, right?
Prosciutto.
Yeah, prosciutto. There we go. I wanted to stick with the Italian theme.
That's what I'm saying. That's right. So
great.
Well, that sounds really good.
For folks that are watching and listening, thanks for joining us. We're here with Mr. Peter Krause. If you haven't had the opportunity to get to talk with Peter, now is your chance. So leave your questions. If you have any questions for Peter, we will try to get to those as we go through the show a little bit. Peter, do you want to talk a little bit about the biggest motorsport event in the country that happened this past weekend a little bit?
Well, it's fun. I'm a great fan of the Rolex 24 at Daytona. I'm not sure what it's called now. I mean, it used to be the Sun Trust, and then the Sun Bank 24. And
yep.
I mean, I've been going to that event now for 32 years, on and off. I did not go this year. Technology is really good. I get some of the live telemetry feeds from some of the teams that I've worked with in the past. And, I did the NBC Gold Track Pass this time, and that worked out really, really well. I didn't watch the whole thing, but I watched about 6 hours, and I was captivated by the fact that the overall distance record was broken, just smashed this year. 833 laps, huge increase over the last, over the previous quickest. And, this is a function of the reliability of the cars. It's a function of the speed of the cars. It's a function of the limited period of time that the teams spend in the pits. In endurance racing, everyone will always tell you the people that win are the people that spend the least time in the pits. And, I was watching Wayne Taylor's team. This guy, man, he looks like a nice guy on TV. But I had an industry colleague tell me today that he is ruthless and that he would run over his own mother to get to the start finish line, to get to that checkered flag first.
Absolutely.
But he put together a stellar version of the super team with Scott Dixon and Ranger Vandergaard, and who else was it? There was
Kamui Kobayashi,
another IndyCar driver. But to me, Kamui Kobayashi is actually, in my mind, one of the finest prototype drivers in the world today. He was in a super team, and he distinguished himself with not only the way that he worked through traffic, but how consistent he was with the car placement, how his controlled aggression allowed him to take advantage of opportunities, traffic, use cars as picks when other cars that were threatening him were close. His whole idea of managing the race was critical for Wayne Taylor's success.
Would you
And then
say
moving,
that?
go ahead.
I'm sorry, that aggression component's really interesting, because I talked to a couple of people that have driven the 24, and in particular, my good friend Robbie Foley, who you know as well. And that was something that he was really insistent on when we talked about it over drinks about a year ago after his first. He said, you have to be so precise but aggressive with traffic management. You have to be assertive. And he's in the GTD class, and he's talking about placing the car in a place that forces a car to pass you in a more optimal time for you. Right. So would you say that's something that's important for the driver in that race?
I would say that's huge. I mean, the other thing that was so spectacular about this race, other than the number of laps run, was the minimal number of cautions. That meant, that was, some people opine that was probably a factor of the lower car count, but I just think people are driving better. I saw great courtesy. I saw some paint traded. I saw some bonehead moves, but a fraction of what it used to be. Henry Tinknell tried to stuff it in under Helio Castroneves and spun them both and damaged the Acura in such a way that it was not going to be able to figure in the final standings. And Helio was livid. And part of the reason why he was livid was because his spotter was talking to Tinknell's spotter, saying, easy, man, I know I don't have the speed. I'll let you by. I'm not going to fight you.
Wow.
But then Henry came in from a long, long ways back, realized too late that he was in there, tried to back out and caught the of Helio, and that was that.
Overly optimistic pass. That was interesting.
Yeah. Well, it was disappointing.
It was. The one thing I wasn't disappointed with is, and you never are, is Helio Castroneves' interview. Right? It was fiery. It was exciting. It was honestly something that I think sports car racing and racing in general had 25 or 30 years ago, that now drivers don't show that much emotion. And he has that Brazilian flair, and you go, oh man, he is just pissed.
Well, he was hot without being profane about it. That's what I thought was cool. He was really, you could tell that it was a violent mixture of anger, frustration, sorrow, and disappointment. And my heart, and I know thousands of other hearts went out to him in that interview in the garage. And, they put it back together, and they went fast at the end. They were just too many laps down.
Yeah.
In terms of the LMP2 class, that was a lot of fun. A couple friends of mine up in Indianapolis, Kyle Tilley and Ryan Lewis, who I've spent a lot of time teaching in school with. Ryan is a beast. He's an animal. And he was a lot of fun to converse back and forth with over the week and over the weekend. And those guys finished third in their first attempt. This is a vintage racing team that bought an Oreca and went out in LMP2 and finished on the podium.
Yeah.
They had a former factory Peugeot driver, Nicolas Manassian from France, and he was driving, and the car owner was driving, a fellow named Merriman, and Kyle Tilley, who's the team owner, and then Ryan Lewis, who is, in my mind, a very underrated driver, super driver, and they got their shot, and they made the best of it. They really did. And of course, Colin Braun got drafted in at the very end and ended up winning his second watch.
That was awesome.
That was really, really good after a real ding dong battle between the 52 and the 81 car. That was really, really good. My favorite race and the most competitive race of Daytona for me was the LM class. The battle between the Porsches and the Rahal Letterman team,
Oh, that was wild.
it was spectacular. It
That was
was
so good.
awesome because,
Yeah.
you could, every time I tuned in, it was amazing. And I've had the opportunity to work side by side with John Edwards, coaching clients, mutual clients. And he's a very, very low key guy. And I read this wonderful Sports Car 365 article this morning about how he was interviewed afterwards. He said, I was laughing in my helmet at 1 o'clock in the
I
morning
read that.
because it was so incredibly competitive. It was the
How
only way I
cool is
could
that?
release the tension that was inside me and stay on task. And I just thought that was awesome. It was
That's
really,
great.
really good. It was, they did a really nice job and a super, super finish for Rahal Letterman. They won last year and they won this year as well. So the Porsche was a brand new car. I was really happy to see how competitive the C8R was right out of the box.
Yep. First
I
race.
really think that, they interviewed Doug Finn, who is the head of motorsports for GM, and Doug, Doug has always looked at this and Sebring as a tune-up for them all. So, well, they didn't really knock it out of the park. The cars were, one of the cars was totally reliable. They were up to pace. It's looking really, really good for later in the year.
That's impressive to have not only a new car, but a fundamentally different car.
A different
so
platform.
Significant, a completely different platform. Everything, all the data, and you can certainly speak to that probably, all the data that they had leaned on for quite a while, probably since the C5 is now gone.
Well, that's right. And we all know, you talk about it all the time. Race cars are just generally an evolution of each. So the C5R turns into the C6R, and lessons learned in the C6R go into the C7R. But the platform is roughly the same. It's a front engine, rear drive, pretty standard, normal platform, tons and tons of data available on that.
Push rod V8.
But the mid-engine car, I mean, that is completely out the window. But I was so happy to see those guys up to speed. They had a great roar. They had a good run up to the race. They ran up front. Garcia was exceptional in that car. He did a really, really nice job. And then there's my favorite class, which is the GTD class. And a lot of the reason why I like GTD is because I know a lot of the drivers in GTD, either from having worked with them or worked together with them. It was Bill Oberlin's 61st shot at winning the race, this race. He's a real character, but he is coaching and mentoring Robbie Foley so well. And Robbie's just got natural speed. He, like every other driver who is successful, is calm and maintains control over their emotions and doesn't let stuff get to them and focuses on the task at hand. I was super happy to see Brian Sellers, Corey Lewis, Andrea Caldarelli, and Madison Snow win it in Paul Miller's car.
Yeah.
And Paul
What
Miller, Paul Miller was SCCA racing when I was SCCA racing, 40 years ago. So the issue is that it was really good. The good guys did well. So I'm sorry for going on. I get excited about Daytona though.
No, that was a great recap. I think we hit every class there. But that GTD battle, the Lamborghini seemed to be really quick, and Magnus was in the running there at the end, which is always fun because they're always exciting with their public relations, their videos, their press releases and everything. And it was cool to see the Paul Miller guys back up there after Madison Snow's deal, where he had the driver rankings kind of called him out and kept him from racing last year, and now he's back in it. So
well, what's amazing is he's jumped back in it after a year off, and he's on pace.
He's there,
which just goes to show you the level preparation and
Yeah.
quality that he has.
You know, when I first went, I think my first 24 that I witnessed was 2005, and I remember going, and at the time it was, you know, you could have a 996 GT3 Cup car and show up, and it was almost to the extent, and I've raced several Champ Car races recently. I can say for a fact there are Champ Car teams now that run, you know, the what used to be the Chump Car series that have more budget than some of these guys that would show up at the 24. And this wasn't that long ago; it was 15 years ago. And now there's not. You show up and not that it's unobtainable from a grassroots perspective. It's you can get there, but now the average driver in the field, you don't necessarily you have a lot of the quote unquote gentleman drivers and the drivers that are funding the rides, but these are not guys that take their racing lightly. They are invested, they care, and they're all really quick. And I think the number of bonehead maneuvers that you see directly correlates with that driver quality.
Absolutely. And just one more thing, you know, I got to give a big shout out to Ben Keating.
Hmm,
So
absolutely.
here's a guy who sells cars for a living in Texas and has a couple of really high profile dealerships. He was you know, number one Viper dealer for a long time. He has a Chevrolet franchise. He's got a bunch of things going on, but this is a guy who at 48 years old is driving at the same level and is able to lap just as quick as his full-time professional hired drivers that are 15 or 20 years younger than he is,
Hmm,
in two different cars, in two different classes, in the same 24-hour race.
impressive.
And to me, I think this goes to your point, which you just made, which is people are paying are very serious when they come do this now.
They
It's no
are.
longer a sort of bucket list. I'm gonna, you know, cash in something and go do the 24.
Right.
This is a full-time job for a lot of these people who are really heavily vested in this stuff and want to do it, but they want to do it right.
Absolutely. Well, let's transition over to look at some data from that other racetrack in Florida, from Sebring. So uh, I was at Sebring this past weekend. We briefly talked about it. I drove 3 or 4 different cars. Hopefully, some of the folks whose cars I drove are on the video with us, so we can look at the data. And I just want to go through and have Peter critique a little bit of what he sees. And we're going to stay fairly high level. We won't go nail any, go down any
30
rabbit
seconds,
too
baby.
long.
30
That's right.
seconds.
We'll keep it nice and brief, but I'm excited to have Peter look at my data. So guys, if you have an Apex Pro, if you have a an AIM system, if you have a Motec system, whatever you're using in your race car or whatever combination of devices you're using, if you have the ability and the wherewithal and the if you can hire Peter to come in and do some stuff, whether it's on site or remotely, I would definitely recommend doing that because he's going to take your understanding of what you're doing to the next level. So this will just be kind of a quick excerpt of what he can offer as a value added dealer
Before you go,
for
before
us.
you go too much more, and I
Sure.
turn completely red, um, I do think it's important to realize that when our viewers are looking at their data, that it's super important that they look at it from not just don't look at just one measure, look at a couple of different measures. That means that you are looking at the same information from a couple of different perspectives because it really makes a difference. Really makes a difference to how I just see a lot of drivers going off half cocked. They look at one measure and they say, man, you know, I breathed there. You know, I got to stop doing that. I got to go flat through Bishops at Sebring. And without a big
Right.
picture, without the whole picture, you need to look at G sum, you know, combined G. Look at how much of the tire you're using. And that is, you know, this whole idea of the Apex Pro grip gauge is something that I use all the time and something I hope that we'll use this time. That's all.
Yeah, absolutely. That's excellent. Baker, do we have any questions before we jump into looking at data? All right, I'm going to share the iPad screen real quick. No matter how good I get at doing this, it still takes a couple of seconds. So We'll share it over. There we go.
All right.
All right. So Peter, I'm just gonna pull up a session, and I believe this is a one series. Well, that's the wrong one. Let me find the right session here. It's going to be a one series BMW. Belonged to a friend of mine, Kevin Bandy. Actually, I'm sorry. This is a BRZ. Let me find the proper session here. I should have noted which one this was before we jumped in. There we go. So Peter, this is a 128i BMW, a completely stock car, except for some 200 treadwear Dunlop Durezas. And it's 3,000 pounds, probably 170, 180 horsepower to the tires.
Mm-hmm.
Slight suspension, a little bit stiffer springs and single adjustable coilovers.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing crazy, but what can you emphasize before we even go into this? Can you share a little bit of your process when you let's say that's all you know, you don't know that much about me as a driver? What are your priorities? What are you thinking immediately? What do we need to look at?
So my priorities first are let's optimize the forward motion of the car the best we can. And how we would do that is to make sure that every upward stroke of speed is as linear and unbroken as we can make it. So coming out of turn one at about 750, 800 feet, from the time that that begins to go up right there, that's full commitment. That's wide open throttle and really good transitions here. So this whole idea of sawtooth, the idea of driving up to a peak and then having a linear drop in speed is really, really important. That's the first thing I'm looking at is how good is the transition between, the end of acceleration, the beginning of braking. The
And
next
you're
thing
just
I'm
looking at the speed trace for that, right?
yes, oh
Right.
yes, and
Right.
the thing that's jumping out at me on this trace are two things. The V shape at the lower portion of the speed. So turn three at 1,000, turn five is the second depression, turn seven at 2,200 feet or 2,150. That's turn 10 at 3,000. Turn 13 at 3,500, turn 15 at 4,500, 4,450, turn 16, which is a critical corner on this track leading onto the back straight at 4,750, and then the lowest speed for turn 17, just before you go under the bridge at sunset. So I'm looking at these things and I'm going, yeah, that looks really, really pretty good. There's a little bit of a wobble in 13 at the 3,500 mark, where you could see a little bit of a hockey stick. You see the sharp downward stroke, and then when the speed trace gets close to the bottom, it's not. Yeah, exactly. So what I see is a little bit of a brake release and a roll up to a point where you can full throttle. So I'd want to tighten that up a little bit for sure. The rest of them look good. There's a little bit of that in 15, but the rest of them look great. They really do. Now there is a delay in throttle application at turn one, and I'm looking at that going, okay, the person slowed down. There's a little hockey stick at the end. There's a first depression. Then there's a slight upward trace, and then they have to slow it down again before they go back to full throttle. And that may be just a geometry issue, or just slowing, maybe not slowing quite enough, trying to roll too much speed in there. The tires have reached their limit and you can't go to power. And I think that's what it looks like right here. And then the last thing I'd look at on this is slow shifts. So between 2,000 and 3,000, at 2,200 and at 2,500, 2,600, I shouldn't be able to have those jump out at me quite so much. 5,000 is another one. Now that could be a gear shift across a gate. So instead of just the third to fourth, straight front to back, you might actually have to go back into the neutral gate, go over a gate and then forward. But still, that's a lot. And I would work on that the very next session.
That's awesome. I love that, folks. If you're listening, that's that process of looking at first the top of the speed trace. You went for the top immediately, making sure the tops weren't curved, and then you go to the bottom of the speed trace, and then you're looking at that forward acceleration, the gear changes. That's such a great process because it makes so much sense. It's top to bottom to kind of your finishing touches. You're not going to gain as much time on the upshifts, but you want to make sure that they're optimized.
Exactly.
That makes so
And
much sense.
and I got to tell you, I'm really complimentary of the way that you were turning the car. All these little V's, 1,000, 1,200, 2,200, 3,000. You are stopping the car, turning the car, and going. There is not a lot of wasted time here. I love it.
Excellent. Well, I'll echo a couple of things I noticed. I was, first of all, really impressed with this little car. Kevin has $8,000 invested in this car.
That's a deal.
And I hope I'm not ruining his secret. The 1 Series BMW apparently might be the next Miata. It's light, it's very affordable, and boy, does it, I mean, it handles great. Very, very, very unmodified. Turn 1, I struggled with the whole weekend, and I knew that I struggled. And I showed you earlier. I actually I ran 4 off on the exit in my rental car, and I was turning in early. I was just turning in early. And I don't know if it's because of the visual where there's that, the wall, the whole left side of the track, and you have no way to see your exit until you're almost past the apex of the corner. But I also really, I tend to enter with a lot of speed and kind of figure it out later. And I think if I'd driven a little more, I would have backed up my turn in point. But the fact that you're looking at the speed trace, folks, if you're watching, all Peter looked at was the flatness of the speed trace, and basically the fact that I tried to accelerate and then had to slow slightly and went, aha, that's opportunity. Right. That's excellent. And that's something I struggled with. That's something I struggled with a lot.
So while we still have this the track map above, it's really important to point out that turn 1 is more than 90 degrees. It's tighter than 90 degrees. I mean, the problem is that you can get to the middle, but it's really hard to get off the corner because it keeps turning. It just keeps turning. And see, I think based, now that you've colored this to longitudinal G, I think you could afford to actually bring the braking further into the corner. But then slow more. So if we go into the orange range, we got half a G of slowing right there. Let's go a little further. Okay. Now remember, anything less than minus 0.3 is off the gas. I'm sorry, off the brakes, but off the gas. So the threshold you're looking for is, where does it go to minus 0.3 or less? And that is the area where the flat begins. I would think, right, exactly. So the thing about it is that we have good braking up to that point, but then we have a period of uncertainty, and that's that hockey stick just to the left of the red arrow. Where you come off the brake, but yet, I'm not quite, I don't really have a clear vision of where I should be turning in.
Yep.
Now the cool thing is if you look at the concrete to the right, so there's concrete drains that were covered. If you go just to the right on the track, you can just see like 3 striations out. Okay. So that minus 0.34 is the first one.
Yep.
There's across the width of the track is an old filled in concrete drain. These are old concrete drains, and these are the permanent landmarks that I use to say to somebody, hey, you really need to wait until that first one, the furthest to the left, as we look at the screen, red mark, to turn in, to come away from a position, very as if you drew the wall further into turn 1, and your turn in. Yeah. And so if we just, so if you drew that, kept going right there, so your right front wheel would be there to turn in.
Yep, absolutely. Well, you know, if I had known that going in, because you can tell that my arc bends in probably. I'm adding initial wheel input,
Sure.
you know, definitely before that. And I also I'm thinking balance in my mind, and this is something that I definitely didn't challenge myself enough. And granted, this is someone else's car that I don't want to have to replace, so
Oh,
I'm going to
sure.
take it easy. So I'm thinking balance the chassis, relatively high speed corner, but I could have been so much more assertive, like you mentioned. And I think I knew that at the time, but I was challenging. I wasn't challenging the brake pedal enough there.
Well, I love it because everywhere else, based on this speed graph, you had good confidence and you executed well. And that's why this thing jumps out.
Excellent. Well, that first of all, that helps me a lot to think. I wasn't really conceptualizing the corner is more than 90 degrees. So you do, which is odd, you know, for a high speed sweeping corner where a lot of times your minimum speed, I mean, you can see mine here is just sub 80 miles an hour. You know, in any kind of car, I think I saw Jack Beecham was running right at 80 miles per hour on a slightly stickier tire in an NC MX-5. So it's a fast corner, but usually a fast corner, with the rate of speed we're approaching, we have to turn in fairly, not necessarily early, but we want to maintain that speed through the corner. Therefore, it dictates the slightly earlier arc. But in this corner, we almost have to let the car get further down into it, to your point, to
Exactly.
get around that extra bit of radius that we have to make.
That's right. So typically the GT3 Cup cars that I work with, their minimum speed is somewhere between 88 and 93 miles an hour.
Wow.
Some of the Elan DPO2s are in the 110 to 112 range. And the LMP cars that I've worked with can go as quick as 126 minimum
Wow.
speed through this corner.
Wow. Golly, that's fascinating. 126 miles an hour.
It's sick. It's
It's coming at you fast.
Oh my goodness. Yes, they are.
It gets real bumpy on the exit as well.
Yeah. It's, you know, if this is a beautiful view right here. So the other thing that is great is if you look at the intersection between the old concrete and the new asphalt, that bump is the worst bump. Now,
absolutely.
If you are center or left of center, it's worse. If you are center to right of center, more parallel with the exit curb, it's not as bad. So that's something to think about.
Well, I took this line right here. I don't know if it's appropriate, but I went right over the dirt, and that was fairly bumpy as well. But you definitely get a very harsh bump when you exit. And that's something that's distinctive about this track, Peter, that's a character that I think is important to note, is that half the track is on basically these concrete slabs that we see that is basically the original foundation of the track from the original Army airfield. And then there's the purpose-built portion of the racetrack, which we see here. And they're two very distinctly different surfaces.
They are.
They're really interesting. Peter, a corner that, and we'll start to wrap up here in a couple of minutes, but a corner that I just purely forgot how much fun it was. And I have been eager to hop into the data and look at it and ask your opinion. After you exit Bishop's, which is, you know, close to flat in most cars, I think I probably could have taken Kevin's car flat, but you know, it's
for the most part, right? Yeah, you know, you were figuratively flat.
We were close. I did actually notice exiting. I believe it was 10. Yep, exiting 10, foot to the floor, wide open throttle. Did the several laps in a row to check. If I added more steering, the car would lose RPM.
Right.
A lot of grip relative to power.
Yeah.
But I forgot, I haven't been to Sebring. I mentioned to you earlier, I haven't been to Sebring since 2013. Last time I was driving Sebring. I forgot how much fun it is to come through Bishop's, you know, just absolutely foot to the wood as fast as you can, and hustling the car back track left for 15 right here is just an absolute hoot of a corner. And I don't know why I forgot how much fun it is, but you're hustling the car left. The car's still got load on the right side. You go to the brakes, and so you get a little bit of the rear end kind of walking, and then you kind of wait for the weight to settle and turn the wheel, and the car just kind of pivots.
Yeah.
Is that a corner that you enjoy as well?
I would say that 15 is one of my favorite corners on the track. And I can tell you right now, the fact that you were as aggressive as you were on longitudinal G under braking for 15, and the fact that you were so early to power So I can see that you are basically on full throttle by the time you come off of that asphalt connector after turn into 15 onto the concrete, and you are flat on it, man. I mean, it's beautiful because you're apexing right next to the worker station, which would be a continuation of that arrow right there. Yeah.
Yep.
And it's beautiful. I mean, it's it's very very smooth, very flowing. But it can be also be pretty slick because you're coming in hot, you know.
Absolutely. You know, what was interesting about this corner too, and I've had the same problem in South Bend, um, at VIR. And you know what I realized, we're looking at my basically my first first hot lap for this entire session, which actually um, was a pretty decent lap, turns out, compared to the rest of the session. But it turned 10 at VIR through the uphill S's. In a lot of production based cars, I've noticed that you get a little pad knockback.
Right.
You know, where you have the G's kind of knocked, and you have a kind of spongy brake pedal. And I had the same thing here in Kevin's car, where I'd go to the brake and nobody was home. And I mean, I was full threshold a lot of times there and trying to get it. And just, I don't know if it was the knockback of the pads, or if there was something else going on, but that was something I always felt like I had to prepare for there.
Well, the best part about this is the color graph, the color track, is showing me that you have the proper commitment, and you have the proper commitment in the right place. I think most people aren't blending as well as you are, the red into the orange, into the yellow, and then into the green. I mean,
Right.
that to me is really nice. The other thing is that your minimum speed through 15 is higher than 16, which means that you're fully exploiting the use and the capability of the tire through here. Yeah,
Good.
there's
And
one red dot, but it's pretty darn good.
right. That, you know, sometimes there's always that one pesky red dot.
That's right.
So that's great that you mentioned the transition, because we're really looking for this dark red to orange to yellow that's showing we're releasing the brake, and that's going from hard longitudinal deceleration, transitioning the weight back to the rear of the car as we turn, and allow those front tires to grip, and then squeezing back to power would be the green color.
Can you just for a second go to turn 7?
Uh-oh,
Uh-oh.
getting a phone call. I sure can.
What I want to do is I want to see how much you trail brake into 7. Pretty good. Good.
I tried it. You know, we can check a couple of laps as well and see if it changes. Because I realize we're looking at lap 1, but so that's another great point to bring up, Peter. And this is something I emphasize strongly because, especially for new data users, using the track map with the color overlay is a really great way to start to familiarize yourself with data. You don't have to be overwhelmed by looking at a graph that you might have to take some time to understand, right?
Oh, I think
And
colored maps are the daddy. And
it's awesome.
this is really, really good because you can change the parameters or the color channel of the GPS path. And you can look at several different things. You can look at use of the tire through combined G. You can look at braking through longitudinal G and acceleration as well. Green being full throttle or dark green being full throttle. But man, I see all kinds of good green lights there.
That's the goal. That's absolutely the goal. Baker, real quick, do we have any questions we need to get to? All right, we got a couple of questions here, Peter, if you don't mind.
Let's do it.
Let's see.
I'm sorry for going on so long, man.
No, this is perfect.
You got the most out of the car in that lap. Why is it not the fastest?
All right. So Rob says, if this lap got you the most out of the car, if you got the most out of the car this lap, why would it not be the fastest? And I don't know if this is a more of a theoretical question, but are there occasions when we get everything out of the car, but there's still time?
Yeah, and I mean, I still think that honestly, I probably don't understand the Apex score as well as I should. I think the first thing I take out of the score is that it's incredibly consistent. So what I would do is, in using any channel, look at the highest 3 laps instead of the highest single lap.
Absolutely.
And that is going to give you a better, more complete and rounded picture of what is there. Because if you look at any single parameter, it's not necessarily going to correlate with
Right.
a lap time.
Absolutely. I agree with you there. And I've had to answer that question myself as well, Peter, because there's times where, and I think you would agree with me, exiting a fast corner, apex score, even if you're, let's say we're wide open throttle at the apex of turn 1 at Sebring, well, we're only accelerating in this car probably at 0.15, 0.16 positive G. Apex score is going to be relatively low at that point because we're not near the outside of the friction circle. And apex score is primarily based on where you are on the friction circle,
Right.
modified for some track related parameters and
Topography
your
and-
driving.
Mhm.
And that would be a situation where, let's say you got to the throttle earlier and you're seeing less combined G, but you're accelerating harder. So your apex score is less, but you're accelerating, meaning you're gaining time over the clock. Well, you could have entered the corner with 3 to 5 more miles per hour, right? And be right on the edge of the friction circle still, but not on the throttle.
That's right.
And therefore
So-
you might have a high apex score, but a lap time might be affected.
So I'm going to throw a wrench into into answering this question a little bit. And I would say the new feature of generating the theoretical best in that bar graph color that you have integrated into the app, that is killer to me, because
Absolutely.
this tells me more than the apex score.
Absolutely. And this is just the beginning of these lap time features for those watching. There's a lot more to come with this. Peter, something I actually had kind of a little bit of a revelation this weekend when I was explaining the significance of the display in the car. And I used this screen right here, and I actually went here and I colored this apex, this
Mm-hmm.
histogram plot, this friction circle, this GG plot with apex score.
Yeah.
And I started pointing out some of the areas where we're relatively close to the outside edge of the friction circle, but we see some of these orange and yellow colored plots, right? These smaller ones.
Yeah.
And the best way for me to understand it is if our apex score is, it's basically showing us the friction circle modified for maybe there's more potential in a certain corner than we are aware of. And a perfect example would be turn 13 at Sebring, right? Big camber gain, right? Big camber gain in the middle of the corner. And I saw a lot of drivers drive in really, really deep and actually almost totally underutilize the camber gain and probably slow down 5 to 6 miles per hour more, where they could have kind of turned in a little sooner and put the car into the groove and gotten on the throttle harder and carried more speed, and been on throttle earlier and carried more speed into the corner. So the best way I know how to describe apex score is it picks up some subtle nuances that change in the track. You might not realize that the track's falling away. You might not realize there's a camber change in the corner, and it might be able to just understand something a little bit where it's going. You're close to the edge of the friction circle, but let's say you're right here on the friction circle, but apex score thinks you could have been right here.
Mm-hmm. Well, see, one of the things now that is evident now that you've colored this with the apex score is the concentration of red, which is right in the coast area. The coast area being slightly into the negative, so no actuation of brakes to speak of. I'm talking about the concentration area.
Yep,
so if you just
right here.
circle it right there, yeah. So one of the things that I learned when I spend a couple grand on courses with Claude Ruel and George Seegers and all the people who are really high level analysis engineers, is one of the few things that correlates to lap time is the percentage of full throttle over the course of a lap. So if you have a situation where you are, if you are in this particular case, what this is telling me is something that impacts the apex score significantly is the amount of time or the amount of the lap in this case where that red is being generated. See, when you're full on the throttle, so further up, it's beautiful. It is gorgeous. Even below that, the yellow is there, but the red, that's to be avoided at all costs.
Absolutely.
And to me, this is great because it tells me that there's a little bit of time. Oh, now this is all very interesting because it goes right back to the opening analysis of our interview tonight,
Absolutely.
which is where we're seeing speed versus distance colored by apex score, and we're seeing how deleterious the effect a slow shift can make. Interesting.
Absolutely.
Fascinating.
So some of these red plots on our friction circle are probably created by these slower shifts.
Yeah, I was all ready to blame the coasting driver, but it's not.
Well, I was gonna blame the coasting, or not the coasting, but the prep of the car, because that's what the driver has to do, right? Well,
Okay.
but it was again a very high mileage car, and one of those cars that had I would say a Porsche 944 like clutch release. Have you ever driven a 944? You know that the clutch release is at the very end.
Yep.
So it's one of those when you're driving a new car and you upshift third to fourth and you're releasing your foot off the clutch and you're going, there it is.
There it is. Well,
Right?
I'll tell you, I like this turn one. Look at that speed trace. That's nice.
Yeah. This one a little bit better than the previous lap.
Yep.
A little bit slower, but nice, smooth exit, and probably a net gain on time. I believe we have a couple more questions. We want to throw those.
Yeah, Matt Romanowski asked, is the apex score calculated in real time or when all the laps are completed? And then we had a second question to Peter to talk briefly about his remote service.
Okay, so we got two questions. First, Matt Romanowski, who we both know, and saw a couple weekends ago. Matt asked, is apex score calculated per lap or in real time? I'm sorry, or when all the laps are completed? Right. It's calculated in real time, Matt. So the apex score is quite literally calculated every second while you're driving, and then the lap, each score for the lap is basically the number of red lights divided by the number of green lights. And then that average or that calculation changes once the model has more understanding of the driving. So the score is not modified. When we look at the app and we see high apex scores early on and lower apex scores later as the model gets more up to date and more information, those are not modified. That's the raw score that was produced in real time. Which is why those low grip conditions can create, or I'm sorry, the low, early stage learning conditions create a higher score.
Okay. So one of the things that I want to add on to that is this is why this is a particularly good tool for multi-driver teams on endurance racing, is especially, a lot of people say, well, it's raining, I'm not going to be able to tax the car. Well, let me tell you something. Apex Pro in a rain situation, in an endurance race, really helps drivers who are not as comfortable as others to drive to a demonstrated friction capacity of the car. Now, sometimes sudden jerky moves, control inputs with their feet and their hands can interfere with how easily the car accepts that information. But the reason why the Apex Pro is so good is not just in perfect conditions and not just even taking into account the topography, but it builds this record, this AI tweaked record of what is possible. So
absolutely. Peter, I've raced a couple of times, probably 4 or 5 times with an Apex Pro in the car, and it's very uncanny. And you do have to convince yourself a little bit to trust it, because it has more information than you do to go off of. And I've heard a lot of feedback from customers. I know Mike, and why did I just forget Mike's last name? C5 Corvette, NASA Great Lakes, was here at our office. Mike, I know your last name, I just forgot it. Group 4 leader for HPD for NASA Great Lakes. He said, he made that point to me several times. Said, Andrew, I find the most value with this in the wet, because it helps to give me a little bit of confidence, especially when I'm on the throttle and I'm not sure if I can add more. And I thought that was really helpful.
That is awesome.
And we had another question. What was that, Baker? I'm sorry.
We each asked for Peter to talk about his remote service. Is it like a software, or do you have to send in some data? Or how does that work?
Okay. So Peter, we have a question about Mike Job. Thank you, Michael Cooper. Why did I forget Mike's last name? Mike, I know who you are. Well, we're friends. We're like it's just these things when you're on camera. Sometimes you just forget things. Hamish Pemberton asked, how does Peter conduct remote service, via screen share software or via data sent and phone calls, or a bit of both? Peter, you mind sharing a little info on
Sure.
that?
Before we do one more, since I know Matt is watching, I just want to give a shout out to his exceptional presentation at the driving club at Road Atlanta last Sunday, I guess it was. He did a really, really good job talking about to instructors and prospective instructors how to read this information. His website is very good, trailbreak.net. Got a lot of resources on it. There's a lot of good resources, but he's one of them. So my remote coaching is not inexpensive. What I do is I ask drivers to load not more than 2 sessions for a specific track, sessions that they believe are representative of them driving at a high level. I generally need video. I require video because I want to cross-reference what I'm seeing in the data with car position, car heading, or the approach to particular spots on the track. I use noise, sound, the way the car sounds makes a difference to my ability to divine what the driver is thinking in their head. But then I take data from every recognized data acquisition hardware, from Apex Pro to Bosch to Morelli to Cosworth to Motec to AIM to VBox. And what I do is take it apart and generally write between 6 and 10 pages with screenshots, and finish by recommending not more than 3 exercises and goals for the next time that they're at that track. And it typically takes me a couple of hours to do. I do include a telephone call and generally before and after. So I talk to get context before I get that information. People upload their stuff to OneDrive, iCloud, share a Dropbox folder with me. And then when I'm done, I send them the information, give them time to review it. And then we sit down and we talk about it for another 20 or 30 minutes on the telephone. It's
That's
for
high
the drivers
value.
that do it, it's a big deal.
That's awesome. Well, guys, I would definitely recommend reaching out to Peter about that. I just dropped his link to peterkrause.net. Peter, is there any other way for people to get in touch with you if they want to do remote coaching services, have any deeper questions?
So the best thing, obviously I'm on Facebook. My company Krause and Associates has a spot there. I'm on Instagram, on Facebook, or best way to get in touch with me is email.
Excellent. So guys, shoot Peter an email if you have a need for his services and you need somebody that knows how to work on old Italian cars. Look at your data. That's I can tell you right now, the type of person that can work on Alphas, Ferraris, Maseratis, and Fiats definitely has the patience to deal with whatever kind of personality you can throw at them. There's no way you don't develop that over time.
Very, very true.
Well, Peter Baker's looking at me going like this. So
Yep.
I think that means it's time to wrap it up. Is that what that means, Baker? Or is that something else? He's cutting his head off. That's what it means.
No.
Watching it in real time.
I'm sorry
guys,
we went so long. I appreciate it.
Peter, this was great. Real quick, guys, I'm going to drop another comment in with a sign up for Instructor Summit in Indianapolis. If you're interested in becoming an HPD driver instructor, or you want to become a better one, or you're a racer and you want to constantly get better, because that's what we do when we race, right? We're constantly trying to improve. Join us in Indy here in a couple of weeks. It's going to be a blast. Peter, thanks again. We appreciate everything. I know that everyone here got a lot of value out of that. I learned some stuff about my driving at Sebring. I need to get back down there and apply it.
Well, that's a great deal, Andrew. I really appreciate what you're doing, and I've enjoyed being with you this evening.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
We'll
catch you guys on a future Facebook Live sometime around this time next week. All righty.